This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
I'm just curious. Did you watch the Super Bowl halftime show?
No, I didn't.
I did. I watched it afterwards because I was doing something during it. So I watched like the advert. I have to say that was definitely something to watch. If you haven't, you should at some point pull it up. It will totally take you back to high school if you want to go there.
That's really funny because I did see like on all of my social media feeds where everybody was talking about it. I don't even know what it was, but I was like, everybody was talking about it. And so that made me like not even want to watch it more because I'm like, who wants to go back to high school?
Yeah, I understand.
Some people do, though. I mean, some people were all about it. But so what was it?
Oh, it's Eminem, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, 50 Cent, Kendrick Lamar, and Mary J. Blige doing like songs from the 90s. It was fantastic. It really
I'll
was.
have to take a look at it.
So something interesting happened, and I don't know. So I keep RSS feeds where I get notifications on interesting cases and stuff because of keywords I put in there. And this week, I got 2 notifications about people being found alive. And that's never happened in 1 week before. Like sometimes I get some stuff. But the first one is a 4-year-old girl who was reported missing in 2019. She was 4 years old in 2019 when she was reported missing. So that would make her, 7-ish now. She was found alive living in a room under a staircase in her parents' home. Did you read about this?
Yeah, I did. I just want to point out, like, she was under the staircase when the police came to search for her.
Yeah, they were hiding her from the police.
I don't think she lived under there permanently or anything. This is a situation where the parents had lost custody of their child, and she had an older sibling, and my understanding, I just briefly scanned it because it wasn't something I was super interested in. I was really glad like the child was found just fine, right? But basically the parents, they were non-custodial parents, so they were her biological parents, but they'd lost custody of her. Her older sister was living elsewhere with whomever had been given custody of the 2 of them. And basically the parents reported the child missing as opposed to relinquishing their custody.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the child was under the stairs in like a concealed room or whatever.
It's not more like a storage spot, I think, than a room. I've seen pictures of it. It's very small.
But the child was fine. And basically, except for the police being there to like search for the child, I didn't look really deep into how that all like unfolded, but like when the police showed up, they hid her there. So it's not like a situation where you've got, a kid living in a closet or under a bed or something like that. They were probably living a pretty normal life with her, a little concealed because they'd reported her missing.
Yeah, according to CBSNews.com, this girl's name is Paisley Schultes, and she was 4 years old. She was reported missing in 2019. Authorities said they discovered that Paisley was under a staircase in a home with her non-custodial parents. She was first reported missing from Cayuga Heights in New York 3 years ago. At the time, authorities believed she was taken by Kimberly Cooper and Kirk Schultes Jr., who are her non-custodial parents. This is according to the police department if they're releasing a statement. They obtained a search warrant on Monday for a home in Saugerties. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. After they were told that a child was being held within a hidden location in the residence, the owner, who was not identified, told police he did not know where the child was, saying he hadn't seen her since she went missing in 2019. But an hour into the search, an officer was looking at a staircase in the back of the house that led to the basement and noticed the construction of the steps was odd. Upon further inspection, he thought he saw what was a blanket between the wooden steps, so he removed several boards and found the child and Cooper, who was mom, in what they called a makeshift room under the staircase. The police described it as a small, cold, wet space. Paisley Schultes was taken to police headquarters, examined by paramedics, and believed to be in good health. She was then returned to her legal guardian and reunited with her older sister. Cooper, who's 33, was charged with second-degree custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child. She was arraigned there and taken to the Ulster County Jail, where the family court had an active arrest warrant for her once the child was found. And then, so Kirk Schultes Jr., who is dad, he's 32, and Kurt Schultes Sr., who he's grandpa, he's 57. They were both charged with the felony of custodial interference in the first degree and with endangering the welfare of a child, so the felony is the custodial interference, and endangering the welfare of a child is a misdemeanor. But they were arraigned, and then they were released on their on recognizance with stay-away orders issued by the local court. She'd been in the house the whole time. Neighbors were shocked. CBS went on and talked to several of them. Police said that they'd been to the house where the child was found several times after she was reported missing while following other leads. Authorities say that the residents told them they didn't know anything about her disappearance, and both Schultes Jr. and Schultes Sr. previously allowed them to conduct limited searches of the home, knowing the child and her abductor were hidden within the house and would not be found. I just thought that was pretty interesting.
It is interesting. You have to, so this is sort of this is what I would consider like a domestic family court case matter. Okay. And it's where the children have been removed from the biological parent's custody for some reason, right? I don't know why. And then they were willing to go through all this trouble to keep their child.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know what the situation is. She was reported. I guess I misspoke. I don't think the biological non-custodial parents reported her missing. Someone else reported her missing when she wasn't.
It was an appointed legal guardian.
Okay. And so they reported her missing. And so this child was never in any danger. Well, I don't know, actually. They said she was healthy, but
she wasn't in stranger danger. We can say that.
Right. But also, what purpose does it serve to keep a child that you are no longer their custodial parent unless you really want to have them with you?
Yeah, I can't imagine keeping the child and then damaging the child purposefully, or causing harm purposefully. But it could be that some psychological or substance issue or some other neglect issue could be going on there that we're unaware of currently, or even
sure, and
abuse.
And they did lose custody somehow to begin with. I don't know how, but it just seems like it seems like a lot of effort because she had already been placed elsewhere into somebody else's custody. Her other sibling was there. And it's a lot of work to wait for the police to show up and then hide, right? So I don't know. I definitely don't feel like this is true crime. I am really happy that she's found now. This is sort of, it's not related to our story today, but yesterday I watched something sort of random that came on. And it was about a family. I don't know if you remember, but it was two moms, Sarah and Jennifer Hart.
Yeah.
And they had 6 adopted children. And I believe in 2018, their vehicle was found having gone over a cliff in, I believe, California. But they had lived in Oregon and driven down to California. And I watched this really interesting sort of, I think it was just one long show. So a really interesting documentary about the ins and outs of how those moms ended up with those children. And so the reason I'm talking about it now is because sort of in the process of their biological parents losing custody of them and then ending up being adopted by the Harts. There was some interesting commentary on that particular show about, now these children ended up, I believe all of them but one was found. So they were all killed in their method of their manner of death was homicide, because they did a pretty extensive investigation into what appeared initially to be like a car accident, the car going over the side of a cliff. The sheriff called a coroner's inquest, and the jury that sat for that inquest found that the 2 moms had committed suicide and that the 6 children had been killed. Their manner of death was homicide. And so it was very interesting commentary on the ins and outs of why they were taken away for various reasons from their biological parents, because you're talking about 2 sets of 3 children who were siblings. So three of them were siblings and 3 of them were siblings, and then they were adopted to be 6 adopted siblings, right?
That's so many people.
It is a lot, but they were talking about like the various reasons those kids ended up being taken away from their biological parents. And then some of the appointments that were made as legal guardians, they lost their ability to be legally the legal guardians of the children. And they end up being adopted by these moms, Sarah and Jennifer Hart. And I believe it was from Texas to Minnesota is how it started. So the kids lived in Texas and they were adopted to the ladies in Minnesota. And anyway, it was just a really interesting perspective that biological parents lose their kids for drugs or, mistreatment or whatever. And then the adopted moms drive them off a cliff.
I'll have to check that out. I'm familiar with that story.
The name of it is Broken Hearts.
That's what I was going to ask you, if it was Broken Hearts, because podcast documentary, something came across and I saw that and I made a mental note to check it out, because while I'm familiar with that case, I do not have any, I haven't even read a Wikipedia article. Everything that I know has come from a few snippets that I've caught. And honestly, because it was so many children at one time, it was one of those things that I wasn't sure how I would react, because I knew when I saw the photos of them and sort of a description of how they come together, or that like it was a mix of kids from other families, I was like, I don't know that I'll do well with that. So I will go back and check it out.
It is really hard to look at. Now, it has been several years. All I ever saw was just like when it happened, like because it hit like pretty much mainstream media within like a couple of days of it happening, right? Because this is 6 children going off a cliff, right? I mean, it's a big deal.
At the time, I knew it was 8 people, and I wasn't like some of the things that you're telling me now. Like I knew their names, and I know that there's something to it. I don't know anything about it to intelligently talk about it. I
do. And the only reason I brought it up was because we've got this case with Paisley, her biological parents keeping her being in like, I stand by what I'm saying as far as her like being under the stairs. She was under the stairs because the police were there. Okay. I really don't feel like they kept that child under the stairs. The mom was with the child under the stairs. They were hiding, right?
Yeah, this is just a sensational piece of reporting that's happening.
Sure, but it's an interesting comparison, because I would say that the state removing children from a home and then the parents like trying to keep the child, even though the child has been removed, like obviously there's a legal process for that to get the child back. It is expensive, and people who are having their children removed to begin with usually don't have a lot of resources to battle that. And it just was all of that stuff is very interesting, just sort of on a skimming type level. I don't get really deep in it because all of that stuff is really sad, right? I mean, anything having to do with children and like their livelihoods and their quality of life that they face that is affected by adults, right? It can be really sad. But you've got these sort of opposing situations where the Hart family, they were all in this supposedly really happy family, and, they go over the side of a cliff, and then Paisley's being kept by her her parents who have lost custody of her. And I would say that while misdirected, they were probably keeping her out of love.
Man, that's so complicated. Okay, so this is what I did. I went to look once I heard about Paisley. I went to look and see what I could find out. And this is what I realized. First of all, I don't think you're right that it's not true crime, because I think this is an interesting piece of true crime, but I do think you're right that it's none of our damn business. Does that make sense?
Well, anything that's none of my damn business, I have to say is not true crime, because otherwise I want to talk about it.
Okay, but so here's what I did. I went up there and I was like, I'm going to find out what happened. And then I realized something. Juveniles are protected. Pretty much universally.
Well,
I've run into trouble.
They're supposed to be protected.
Well, hold on. When court comes, so when I go hunting and doing FOIA, like if I have a juvenile case, what I've discovered is even if the juvenile is dead, even if it happened 30 years ago, when I start going to look for it, I am about to face a different set of legal hoops and machinations that I'm trying to find out stuff. So I end up leaving Paisley alone, but not because I want to, because anything related to Paisley's case falls under sealed family court information, except if there's like criminal activity. And now that's why we're able to see.
Well, and if something were to come out and like, I did not look into this case. It could be a coping mechanism for me, because I really don't want to know that child's been living under the stairs being used as some sort of some sort of bad thing happening to them for 2 years. I don't want to think about that. So I think to myself, well, they went above and beyond to keep their child, even though a judge said no, right? But, we could see if the parents had criminal charges, and that could say one thing or another. There was a reason the children were initially removed from the home.
Yeah.
The validity of that reason, it is subjective. For example, and going back just for a second to the Harts, like CPS was involved in their family, but they weren't removed from them.
Yeah. So anytime you end up dealing with like CPS or Department of Family Services, you're immediately in a complex situation, even if you're innocent. And
I feel like Broken Hearts, the documentary on it is a very skewed take on it, and you'll see that. It's not necessarily like a bad thing that it's skewed, and it's not necessarily incorrect, but you'll see what I mean if you go watch it. But I don't necessarily think it's like 100% true, the way that it's skewed, but I mean, they're presenting a very compelling case of what they're skewing it to. So, who can argue with that? But I think that you come from a place of wanting to look into these children, not because you want to be all up in their business, but you have sort of you want to like figure out what's going on, because, in situations that are ultimately true crime, the best thing you can do is arm yourself with knowledge to possibly prevent further things happening to other children, right? I mean, that's how you learn about this type of stuff, how people act and how they end up in the situations they end up in. And you're right, children are protected, and I feel like they should be. And so I know you want to know more. And I mean, Paisley, I'm very glad she's safe, and I hope they get the kind of judge that looks at the situation and offers real solutions. I do too, and I feel like because of the stark nature of the legal system, that probably won't happen. I know, but I have to put it out there. Jail. Well, I mean, I don't think the father and grandfather are necessarily going to jail. They're more than likely cases like this in that area, from what I can tell, when realized I couldn't get Paisley's records, but what I could see was there are some good judges in that area that are making some sound decisions, and maybe they'll have the same ideas that you have, being that they were doing everything they could to keep this child out of foster care, which in some situations
can sway a judge to set up a parenting plan, because that's the idea of keeping this all in family court. Because ultimately, these are all family court issues. While they are some criminal issues, they all tie to whatever was happening in family court. And if they're capable as a family to raise this child, I hope that it comes their way. And if they're not capable, I hope that those kids find themselves in situations where they're safe and they have a legal guardian who can raise them, and eventually they can, be back with their family of origin if they choose to do that. It's very complicated once you get into these situations.
I really would. I hope that too, but I'm afraid it like the worst mistake they could have made, even if it was for good intentions, was to defy a court order. It's not a good idea. And getting back in front of a judge is going to illustrate how that's not a good idea.
Yeah. And so I have another example, and it ties into both of these things, by the way. I'm just going to throw it in there. So this is another one of those weird things that ended up in my feed. So I pulled up a source on this. This is from February 16th, 2022. You can go read about it at magnoliastatelive.com. And there's not attributed to directly to an author. Everything is just staff writers. So there's a woman named Janice Rose Bullock, and she was summoned to appear in Pearl River County Chancery Court in May of 1977 in relation to a custody case between her and her ex-husband. They were battling for custody of their 4 children. But when that court date came, Janice did not show up for court. She doesn't show up for her court date, and then she was reported missing at the time as Janice Rose Bullock. She worked in various places across the Gulf Coast. After leaving the county in 1978, it shows that she worked in various places across the Gulf Coast, and that she is now in a nursing home in Fort Worth, Texas. So she's no longer a missing person. She had been a missing person all this time. The children are all adults at this point.
Right. Well, actually, the children had submitted their DNA, and in the event that she was an unknown person who had been recovered. So, like a body found, basically. And it's so she had given up on the fight with her husband her estranged husband to keep her children, and her life took her in a very interesting direction. They actually found that she had adopted, in a way, a son, right? And he had no idea until the missing persons investigation found his adopted mom that she wasn't his biological mother. So they interviewed the man who was. The way that they found it was through social media, looking at pictures, and he was ultimately who his name is David Streety. He had pictures of himself and his mom on social media.
In air quotes.
His mom.
Yeah, he says he was kidnapped and sold.
Right, but he didn't know that.
Right.
He was raised by Janice and her deceased husband, not the husband that was taking her to court over the 4 kids. So her 4 children, they spoke up and they said that, they were very happy that their mother had been found, and that unfortunately she was very ill, which she would be, she'd be older now.
Yeah.
It really just unraveled really fast. But so her missing persons case has been resolved. She's not missing. She left on her own accord, her own volition, and she started a different life.
Yeah. Okay. So this was the most interesting thing to me. She just changed her first name from Janice, Janice, to Janis. And basically using that name dropped off the radar, kept all the other details the same.
And it really wasn't a big deal. I think she probably could have been found at any point, but yeah, the name, the spelling. So that's apparently something people do. They change the spelling of their name, where It's still the same name, but it's spelled differently, and it alters a lot of things.
It really does. If you can convince one person to give you an official document with that spelling, you can actually build a whole new identity just by changing a couple of letters. And I found that to be really fascinating. This case basically lasts my entire life. Now,
Yeah.
they didn't really start hunting for her until the last 10 years or so. And then in the last 5 years, they sort of ramped up, her adult children sort of ramped up looking for her. I was shocked that they submitted, and I said that wrong, but they submitted their DNA to name us.
Right. They wanted to see if she was out there unidentified.
Yeah, and Harris County Sheriff's Department grabbed it and basically NamUs passed it over to them, and they started looking into it, and they were able to go back and find the subpoenas from the May 1977 court cases, and that's where they started building a case on it, and eventually they found her. I was just shocked. So this is one of those cases, like some of the other stuff we talk about has such terrible endings, and I know they said she's ill. My assumption based on the descriptions they give of her is that it might be something in the realm of Alzheimer's right now.
Right.
So she may not even know what's going on. But all things considered, I consider this to be a happy ending. I consider Paisley's case to also kind of be a happy ending.
They're both happy endings, but it's also they're bittersweet because Paisley's going to
some form of foster care or going
not with her custodial or not with her biological parents, right? And then unfortunately, Janice's 4 kids have to face the realization she left on her own volition, like she wanted to leave. And that can be really hard, but she's alive. So
I don't know that she wanted to leave as much as she wanted to avoid whatever conflict was going on there. That gets into those nuances you talk about where we just don't know what was going on.
Well, the point is, like, nobody forced her.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're right.
She wasn't kidnapped. She wasn't murdered. She left. She left her life. She walked away from it. People do that. And I mean, her kids must be like upper 40s at least. And they probably realized that there was some sort of reason for that. I mean, I guess if you've got a competent parent wanting your children and walking away from them, it could be better than putting them through the battle.
Yeah,
and none of that is any of my business.
Yeah, this falls under happy ending from something that was a missing persons report, and now it does fall off into none of our damn business, unfortunately. But that's okay. I've been down a rabbit hole anyways. And you apparently jumped in this rabbit hole with me, although I don't know that you knew that you were getting into the rabbit hole with me. Did you know that when you pulled up this case and started digging into it?
I think I was pretty aware of what was going on. Yeah. I mean, I knew it was something. I feel like that we've opened a little bit of a Pandora's type box here.
Yeah. So this goes back to New Year's Day, 2012. And this has been covered from one of those perspectives that I call the family banging a drum, meaning someone has died and that person's family has decided that they were murdered. And in the face of even the proper authorities, they have just decided that they are going to bang their drum, sign petitions. How this falls and everything is, that is what I believe some element of what's going on in the Ellen Greenberg case is a lot of drum banging going on. It had some sort of like could be suspicious elements to the Ellen Greenberg case. This one is what would happen if the Ellen Greenberg case were successful, in my opinion. The case that we're talking about today that you brought to my attention is the suicide of Ashley Fallis. And you brought this up, that her husband, Tom Fallis, who is a former deputy in Weld County who specialized in working in the corrections part of the sheriff's department. He worked in the jail. It spawned this, for lack of a better word, legal morass that continued on for years. with the
Right.
family even filing lawsuits against the police and sheriff's department there, accusing them of covering up a crime.
Right. And so a lot of that sort of the reason, so it's a compare and contrast type situation with Ellen Greenberg's death, because, in her case, she was the only one in the apartment. Her fiance, Sam, had gone briefly to the gym in the same apartment building. The door was locked from the inside. And so there was a blizzard happening outside. And so that narrows down like what could have happened tremendously, right? And so in this case, Ashley and Tom and the Fallis family, they had a New Year's Eve party, and they had people over leading up to going into 2012. And they had a good time that night up until the very end. And so everything that you read, there's all kinds of accounts of Ashley's state of mind, like as it was perceived by her family and friends that were at the New Year's Eve party, right? And so you've got this happy-go-lucky image being portrayed. And then after midnight, there was a bit of a sort of falling out type situation where what happened was, I believe most everybody had left. There's a colleague of one of either Tom or Ashley's that was at the party who said like they were drinking a lot, like they were having a good time. And it was mentioned, and I've seen contradictions of it, but I'm just going to kind of ignore those and go along with it. Ashley has stated that she had had a miscarriage that day.
Right. So they had been a pregnant couple, and then they weren't anymore.
Right. Now, keep in mind, I believe she was 28 years old. She had 3 children. One of the children had, kind of a serious medical condition. And so keeping that in mind, a miscarriage could have possibly meant a different thing, right? I mean, she's got a family. She seemed to be taking the miscarriage in stride. The other side of that, I guess it is a little bit relevant, but I don't really want to debate it. It has been said she wasn't actually pregnant, or she may have had a chemical pregnancy.
I've seen numerous things here. Okay. I don't know what the actual facts are.
What I do know is there's a credible witness who said that at the party, Ashley told her that she had had a miscarriage, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And then, she was sympathetic to the situation. And she said that from all she could tell that Ashley, she wasn't taking it hard, at least not superficially. The party goes on. Everybody's having a good time. They're getting ready to leave. And as they're leaving, Ashley says something to her. It's an uncle. I don't know which side of the family or how that works, but there was an uncle there, and she asked the uncle if she could have some of his weed to smoke later. And her husband overhears it, and he's infuriated. And I should point out, this is in Colorado, and so it's interesting how much life has changed, because now Colorado has all kinds of legal weed use. But at the time, Tom, Ashley's husband, became infuriated, and there were lots of cuss words and yelling, and basically I feel like he was under stress because he worked at the corrections facility as a corrections officer, and she was a respiratory therapist at, I don't know if it was a hospital or a medical center, but both of them were subject to drug testing at any time. Okay.
Yeah, random drug tests.
And he was angry that his wife had asked for the weed. And it doesn't elaborate on whether he gave it to her, whether they had some. It doesn't get that far. But basically, her asking for some weed is a catalyst, because he immediately kind of flies into a rage of you're irresponsible, we could lose our jobs. And his colleagues were at the party, and he felt it could look really bad for them for her to be smoking a little weed. Okay. I don't know if he had been drinking. I know she had been drinking. but it never really comes up in what I've researched. It doesn't really matter all that much. It was New Year's Eve and they were at home, right? They could have been doing whatever they wanted to be doing. But the outrage that Tom has about the weed situation causes Ashley's mom and dad to leave because it's uncomfortable, right? And the mom and dad leave and they stop like shortly after leaving. And I guess they were just catching their breath. And according to Ashley's mom, she sent her son-in-law a text and said, calm down. The kids are in the house. But it was an attempt to be just kind of, I feel like sort of checking back in, like maybe feeling a little bad that you left in the middle of all that. So it was an intense situation, right? And I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but when you're having like a house party and everything's great and then something goes wrong, like the letdown is so much sharper than if it's just a regular day where something goes wrong, right? Because you're just so happy.
The air goes out of the room. It's really weird.
And so Ashley didn't witness everything that Tom said to the people who ended up sort of ushering themselves out of the door after the debacle over the weed. And so according to Ashley's parents, they weren't gone long at all. Like, I mean, it was just literally they drove down the road and stopped somewhere and they were talking about it and she was texting him. And Tom went into the closet. He was getting ready to go to bed. They were all getting ready to go to bed. And the next thing he knew, Ashley had shot herself in the back of the head.
Yeah.
He immediately calls 911. You can tell he is absolutely distraught on the phone. He gives the phone to his 9-year-old daughter while he's trying to like stop the bleeding or whatever.
What's the address of your emergency?
No, 57 seconds in the ocean. My wife just shot herself in the head. Please help me. Please help me.
Okay, sir, listen to me. I've got somebody else getting help on the way, okay? Where's she at?
7-Eleven Cincinnati Street. Evans Carlisle. Ashley, no. Ashley, no. Ashley, no. Listen to me. Hey.
How old is she, sir?
Hey, no.
Sure.
Stay in here. Come here. You stay in here. You are not leaving me. You are not leaving me. Stay right here. Hey, you stay right here. Look at me.
Sir.
Look at me. You can hear me. You can hear me. I know you can hear me.
And the mom who has in the vehicle that has stopped down the road sees like all the lights and sirens coming back to the house, and she goes back to the house. She's, grabbing her grandchildren, trying to shield them from what's happening. And there was a conflict in the response. So there's like a sheriff's response and like a police response. Okay. I'm not sure I completely understood, but so there was a sheriff's response and a police response. And so keep in mind that Tom worked, I assume, with the sheriff's department, because I assume that that's where the correctional facility was under.
He worked with the county sheriff.
Okay. And so there was whoever arrived on scene first took control of the scene. And the thought was that special treatment might have happened at the scene of the crime because of what happened, because of the fact that both agencies were there. And there's some members of the police department, they said, it should have been treated like a crime scene. There's body cam footage of the incident from the deputies as they're arriving. So you can sort of see some of the stuff. It was just a hectic scene. And
it's very frantic. It's chaotic.
And so the paramedics arrive and they loaded her and they went. So they didn't waste any time trying to get her stable on scene or anything. And so they take her to the hospital, and then there's accounts of Tom at the house pacing, very upset, very distraught. And he ultimately is taken into custody, and he is being essentially grilled by law enforcement at the exact same time his wife is in the hospital dying. He's actually informed by the investigator interviewing him that she did in fact not make it, which is, I mean, it's gut wrenching, right? To see like all that happening. He wasn't by her side. He's being told that there's no way she inflicted the injury upon herself, and that, he had to have done this. And so this is a husband and a wife situation where the husband was in the room and the wife shot herself. And I feel I'm missing something because, the civil lawsuit you mentioned, which is like more recent, because we're talking about this happened New Year's Eve of 2011 going into 2012, right? And so that's 10 years ago. They said that he got special treatment and that they didn't process the crime scene like they should have, right? They didn't take his shirt, except they did take his shirt at the station. They didn't test his hands for gunpowder residue. There was a lot of things that they bring up, and they say that because he was one of yours, right? Like the whole, thin blue line situation, you guys didn't treat this professionally like you should have. And therefore you're not catching our daughter's killer or Ashley's killer, right? And so that's the position that's being taken there, except I can't seem to reconcile that with the fact that he's in an interrogation room where he doesn't want to be answering investigators' questions when his wife dies.
Yeah, so I'm with you on that. There's some like loose facts that come up in here. Here's what it looks more like to me. I just want to like state this to begin with. The very first thing is, I don't think this was not treated like a homicide. I think this was initially treated like traumatic life-saving measures need to be taken to save this patient by the EMS and by the people who had responded. That was the initial goal, was, this happens in such a short period of time. I think that they were trying to save her life. There is some testimony in this case that comes from a neighbor that I think is wildly out of context, and that is the neighbor saying that Tom said he killed Ashley. And I think it's more drove her to it.
Right. He said that he was 15 years old. He was sitting under the window of his house, I guess because there was a commotion happening. And this is much later, okay? Like there's several interviews with the family of the 15-year-old boy as the investigation progresses, and it's never brought up initially, right? It's kind of an afterthought. He says that he heard Tom pacing around outside. Like I said, he was observed pacing outside, and he said that he shot her, basically. And he took, an older version of this 15-year-old kid, took it to be a confession. There was also, like, to sort of impeach his testimony, like, the kid had gone on camping trips with Tom after this incident, right? Which would seem a little off if he genuinely believed that he had killed his wife. And so I feel like maybe I feel like there was a lot of manipulation happening here, and that's pretty normal in a criminal type case. I have kind of mixed thoughts on this because, it is brought to light as it's a criminal investigation. I don't see how any of the information I've seen from basically her family, everybody saying there's no way she killed herself. He had to have killed her. I don't see that being supported in like the immediate aftermath of the incident, simply because he wasn't with his wife when she died. I mean, and I can't see why that's not being pointed out, except I guess I would be like really mean to say.
Yeah.
And so you've got a situation where, her mom and dad were at the party and they say she didn't kill herself. Okay. There's no question that there was a conflict happening. The conflict was so bad that her parents left the house just to be in the vehicle to immediately turn around and text Tom and tell him to calm down. Okay.
Right.
He had at least in his mind, it was a valid concern. Okay. He felt like weed was a much bigger deal than I feel like it probably was, but he wanted to be on this, straight and narrow path because their livelihood could possibly be at stake as far as he was concerned. And if you're giving this, essentially she had drank a lot. There was no question about that. She had drank a lot that night. And he's thinking that his typically responsible wife who's been drinking is now going to smoke weed, right? And she just had a miscarriage the same day. And he's getting ready for bed with absolutely no idea that she has gone to her nightstand, pulled out her gun, and has put it to her head. And then he does know she shoots herself because I imagine he hears it. Okay, so it's her gun that's in her nightstand, and she's found within arm's reach of where the gun is kept. Okay?
Yep.
So that gives you an idea of how quickly that happened. All right. Now, for 20-ish, 30-ish, 40-ish women, and I am one of those women, and I've been all those different ages, right? Your facilities can be intact, and you could have everybody say she would never kill herself, and there can be one tiny little thing that sets any of us off. And the difference is the gun in the nightstand and the irrational reaction to his control over her. Because as an adult woman, she's thinking, if I want to smoke some weed, I'm going to smoke some weed. I don't want my husband telling me I can't, right?
Yeah.
Now, his argument was completely valid. I mean, I assume they couldn't afford to lose their jobs, and he didn't want her family being that sort of influence on her, right? And he blamed it all on them, which of course it was absolutely up to her. Adults have to be in agreement. The position he was taking was more like a parental, don't do that type thing, right?
Right.
Okay, that happens. I mean, it happens a lot in a lot of marriage relationships, but it causes feelings that can make you feel like you don't have control over yourself. That can make you decide really fast that you need to end it all.
Yeah.
Because there's no way out of this, right? I mean, he's just never going to let me do what I want to do. So let me just shoot myself. I'm going to show him, right?
Yeah.
Except, it's a permanent solution to a very temporary problem.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened to Ashley.
Yeah, and so the family pushes and pushes. They put Tom through the ringer. And I'm just gonna go ahead and point out right now that Tom Fallis did not kill Ashley Fallis, legally speaking, and he didn't kill her in any way. I don't care what civil suit they file or what thing they have going on.
I don't know. Is he named in the civil suit? I thought that was mostly
the point is that they covered up for him. So
and I still don't see what the basis of that is. I'm having trouble. It's a work of fiction to say that, I think.
Well, so there's a long form article that has a couple of interesting things going on in it. And I'm going to put that in the show notes. I'm not going to do the whole article, but it's from 5280.com. The title is Wrongly Accused, One Man's Tragic Journey Through the Colorado Legal System. And there's a detective in there named Shakely who basically they give Tom's side of things. And Shakely is the one who the jurors did not believe. And frankly, I don't believe him either. He was the detective on the case. Then there's other sources for this as well. But I will say that Shakely, where he breaks down on the stand, the defense does not. And the defense brings up one very interesting thing in this article. It's towards the end. Here's what it says. Wilkerson, who is the coroner in this setup, it has a lot of interesting interactions with Shakely, and that Shakely really wants Wilkerson to change the manner of death. But the coroner's testimony was compelling for a couple of reasons. One, Ashley had a tubal ligation, and the tubal ligation had failed. So she might have been able to get pregnant, but the pregnancy hormones in her blood did not indicate she had been recently pregnant. And she had definitely not had a miscarriage that day. So that's the first thing. Her blood alcohol content from the time of the testing was 0.088. The other big thing was that Ashley had trace amounts of, guess what? Guess what she had in her system?
Xanax?
A benzodiazepine. She did not have Xanax. She had
Klonopin.
She had clonazepam or Klonopin in her urine, and it was consistent with someone who it was a low level. So she either hadn't been taking it or hadn't been taking it correctly immediately before. So there's a very strong possibility that she was going through some of those withdrawals we talked about. And if she had been jumping around, and you found this, you found the other part for me. I found that today, but you found, I think, was that Dateline? Was that, who was that?
I think it's Dateline.
You found some media where
It's
they
literally
actually
a screenshot.
yeah, you showed the it shows the bottles with her name on it, and I've been looking for either Xanax or clonazepam, and you found a screenshot from the crime scene where someone had photographed it, so it's definitely tied to her. Because like one of the accounts says she wasn't taking those drugs, like they weren't prescribed to her, and somebody tried to accuse her of basically buying those drugs like recreational, but that shows that she had a prescription for it. And I'm going to bet that's going to be the case. Now, where the case turns from suicide, because they stick with suicide for a long time.
I was going to say, he wasn't initially charged.
2 years afterwards, in June of 2014, a reporter named Justin Joseph was not doing his job very well. And by not doing his job very well, I mean, he's the definition of true crime excess and should not be a reporter in the true crime arena. But I'm sure the home and garden section at Walmart has a sale he can cover.
He was a young reporter, and he was looking for a story.
Yeah, so this is his story from KDVR.com from June 16, 2014. Justin Joseph, this is for you. I'm crediting your work. I want to credit your work. I want to give you all the credit that you're due. Okay. I want to make sure I said that. 2 years of tears. 2 years of tears in Evans, Colorado. Every day, Ashley Fallis's 3 beautiful children are closer to knowing what may have happened to her. I'm just trying to do the right thing, said Jenna Fox, Ashley's mom. I know how much she loved her kids, and she wouldn't have missed raising her kids for anything, except for the suicide. 8 weeks after police reopened the investigation into Ashley Fallis' 2012 death, there are more questions and new accusations of misconduct concerning the Evans Police Department. I'm very leery from experience, said a former officer interviewed by Fox 31 Denver, this is KDVR.com is their website. The officer came forward after Evans reopened the Falls investigation. I feel that when officers mess up, they'll do whatever it takes to protect their own, this officer said. Fox 31 Denver agreed to conceal the officer's identity because he or she is afraid of retribution. The former officer knows Officer Michael Yates, who is under investigation for misreporting evidence in the Fallis investigation. In April, neighbor Nick Glover told Fox 31 Denver that he heard Ashley's husband Tom allegedly confess to the crime outside the window the night of the incident. So Glover says he told Officer Yates about what he heard in the following days, but our investigation revealed those statements never appeared in Yates' reports. Fox 31 Denver also uncovered another key statement which appeared to be changed in Yates' reports. They will do that whatever it takes to solve a crime the way they want to solve it, said the former officer. If you complain and tell the truth against the culture, you're retaliated against, which I actually have no doubt of that. If you're asked questions and you're caught at something, you deny. Along with Yates, Sergeant Jason Phipps and the assistant chief at the time, Mike Parkos, led the investigation into Ashley Fallis's New Year's Day 2012 death and cleared her husband, Tom, a fellow Weld County law enforcement officer. The former officer levels a serious claim against Yates, Phipps, and Parkos. Reporter Justin Joseph asked, did you ever see the detectives that you worked with, the detectives that are now working on the Fallis case, change or alter evidence? The former officer responded, yes, in my experience, there were times when sergeants and lieutenants changed their reports to the way they wanted them written, and I was not comfortable with those changes. I believe there was a basis for a homicide charge filed against Mr. Fallis, says nationally renowned forensic psych forensic pathologist, Dr. Cyril Wecht.
Jeez.
Just to tie this all the way back to Ellen, for decades he's given expert opinions in high-profile cases, including the California case against Scott Peterson, who was convicted of killing his wife Lacey in 2002. I find it interesting that this guy has been the one that's consulted on every single thing that I think is wrong in the criminal justice system. Fox 31 Denver hired Dr. Wecht to review the Fallas case, including witness statements, forensic evidence like blood spatter. The key word there is hired, by the way. Crime scene photos, including those suggesting a struggle in the room where Ashley was found dead. In Wecht's opinion, he believes it's possible that the crime scene could have been staged to look like a suicide. Fallas either deliberately, with some knowledge as a police officer, shot her in that fashion to stage it as a suicide, or he just got lucky, said Wecht. Wecht says in his independent expert opinion, Ashley's husband Tom should be charged with her murder. Wecht also believes there should be an independent investigation into a possible cover-up of evidence by officers at the Evans Police Department. To say the investigation was botched would attribute it to negligence or incompetence or lack of experience, but we've gone beyond that to something conspiratorial in nature, said Wecht. Editor's note, Fox 31 Denver verified the former Evans officer's account that he or she raised questions about issues with evidence during the person's employment in Evans. The issues raised by the former officer in documents reviewed by Fox 31 Denver were raised years before Ashley Fallas' death. Fox 31 Denver also spoke with attorneys who raised issues with the court about Evans officers corroborated by the former officer. So what you have here is a reporter who ran with the story because he wanted to make a name for himself. He didn't mind that it was in someone else's blood.
Wait. That's your statement is true. Okay. However, it has taken me years of looking into this type of stuff to realize some of my positions.
Okay.
And I could have been one of the people that would be lobbying for him to be put on trial for it. I could be. The mom gives a very good, honest account of why her daughter didn't commit suicide. It's not, in her mind, her daughter didn't commit suicide, right? Now, same thing with Ellen and her parents. Their daughters didn't commit suicide, like, to them, right? And I just want to caution, like, I feel like the worst person on earth to be the ones, like, telling these parents, yes, I'm sorry, but they did commit suicide. And so I can see where somebody could get caught up in wanting to tell the story for them and wanting to bring justice. So it's taken me a really long time to sort of been able to, I think, take a non-biased look. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Like, there was a younger me, a much more passionate me, that wanted to make sure that people were locked up for what they did. But I've had enough time in the criminal justice system and around family courts to know that the one thing I know for sure is that people are unreliable. Even the best people are unreliable at best in courtrooms, and unreliable at best when police officers are talking to them.
Right. And so everything that you mentioned there, like about the police changing stuff and all that stuff. So you're right. I believe all that stuff happens. But here's what you've got to keep in mind. Police officers, in my experience investigating cases, they change things to protect their own egos.
Not only that, they sometimes change things to keep things from being complicated. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm not saying that that former officer is wrong. But if that former officer, and say I was like his lieutenant, and he brought a report in that was due, and that for some reason had gotten past the sergeant, and the sergeant didn't even read it. He just signed it, and it gets to my desk, and it says, on Friday, April 5th, 2003, I was riding down the road in my patrol car. I was thumping Gin and Juice by Dr. Dre. I was thumping Gin and Juice, and I was smoking a joint because it's legal now. And I looked up, and there was an alien spacecraft that happened. And then he tells me about pulling someone over and like having to give them a ticket. I'm going to go back and say, if you don't mind, let's not have the alien reference. Let's not have the reference to the joint, and let's not have the reference to the Gin and Juice. And I'm being completely hyperbolic about this, but my point is,
right, but it does change the case, though.
It definitely changes the case. Whether it's right or wrong, that former officer could have been doing something like that and being told to change those things because he didn't understand that his report basically wrecked the case. And if it was about him, it might wreck his career inadvertently.
Right. And so, you can take that and, dissect it for what it is, because did the person deserve a ticket? Probably not.
Yeah.
It's the same type of thing. So because this reporter opens the case back up, so it happens in January 1st, 2012, her manner of death has changed from suicide to homicide in 2014. Tom is arrested. And in 2016, they put him on trial. Now, if you'll keep in mind, the case we initially started this whole sort of mini series on, Ellen Greenberg, her fiance was not arrested. Her cause of death was briefly a homicide, and it was switched to suicide, and it remains suicide, and it is suicide to this day. You and I have talked extensively about how we feel like it should probably be changed to accident.
Or a different thing.
Well, I feel like unless they're going to get a whole new category.
That's what I mean. Like if you had
I don't think that's going to happen here.
Honestly, it's a suicide with an underlying factor.
But that's not considered in manner, though.
Well, then it would be manslaughter.
No,
homicide.
That's not.
It would be homicide, manslaughter by yourself. I don't know how this is a new thing.
Okay.
What I'm saying is another person didn't kill you.
Okay, but it's not going. I don't feel like it's going to. I don't feel like we're going to get a new category here. We're looking at natural, accidental, homicide, suicide, or undetermined. Okay, those are the choices for manner. I feel like this was an accident, Ellen Greenberg. Okay. Now, you're right. There could be all kinds of other things happening, right? I feel like the reason I say it's accidental, it's not undetermined because we know why she did it, right? Well,
right.
We think we know.
Yeah.
Okay. We also know what happened, right? We know that she took a knife and she stabbed herself with it. The thing is, she was taking medication under the care of a doctor that she didn't understand what was the outcomes. Well, none of us understand what all the outcomes could possibly be. But in different circumstances, she wouldn't have stabbed herself to death. And so to me, it's accidental.
Yeah,
right?
It's very complicated, but you're right. It's an accident. Like Ellen Greenberg did not kill herself, but Ellen Greenberg on drugs did.
Right.
Or coming off of drugs,
because she was
how you want
under
to look at it.
a doctor's care. Okay. She was working with a doctor who was a professional it's not the doctor's fault. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is there was no way, if it was truly a chemical type reaction that made this outburst happen, Ellen Greenberg didn't have the knowledge to fix that or to even recognize it. She didn't even recognize what was happening to her. And so that's why I lean towards accident, because there were factors that she wasn't directly responsible for. That, for example, switching the medications and stuff. I mean, yes, she switched them, but she did so on the advice of a professional, right?
That's what we believe, yes.
And so, that's what the doctor has said in the notes. She was, for whatever reason, they were switching through them. And so, and I guess it kind of comes from where people do the courtesy of doing overdoses as accidents.
You mean, so it's like saving face for the family kind of thing?
Well, if you've got the manners of death, and they are what they are on every. I mean, this is a form, right?
Yeah, it's a
Where
click down. That's
there's
literally
not
on a
an
tablet.
other, okay? There's not an other, like an other selection, right? It's you have to decide: did the person die naturally? Did they commit suicide? Did someone else kill them? Homicide? Was it an accident, or is it undetermined? Right? So there's no question that she died by her own hand. The thing is, it was an accident. If you fell off of a cliff, what would your death be? I said fell.
Accident.
Okay. Now, so you accidentally fell off a cliff. I mean, you killed yourself, but it was an accident, right? Okay. Well, being on medication that you don't completely understand and having a bad reaction causing you to stab yourself, I understand that that's a stretch. However, it's the same type of thing. I mean, she didn't leave a note. She didn't tell anybody she was going to kill herself, right?
Looking at these two cases, the same thing happened. Like Ellen just didn't have a gun.
Well, and see, that's very interesting because you're absolutely right. There was no intent behind Ellen or Ashley to actually kill themselves.
Yeah, now
So it was
Ashley's
an
on the other end.
accident.
I mean, I think because pot comes up in this, I think that Ashley was looking to self-medicate because she was having something to self-medicate.
Either she had a miscarriage, or she either actually had a miscarriage, or she was pretending to have had a miscarriage. And I make no judgment on that at all. I have no idea. Okay. Either way, you're looking at somebody who's having some emotions there.
Well, so she could be.
I think the biggest factor was the alcohol.
Yes, she was at 0.8. She was drunk, but there's a lot going on with.
Was that her level?
Yeah, 0.088. It was almost a 0.09. So she legally could not have driven a car.
So in that situation, if there was not a gun in her nightstand available to her, which she took the gun out of her own nightstand, it was her own gun. Okay. So let's say that there were no guns available. All right. For whatever reason, no guns in the house. Would she still be alive today?
I don't know that, because she may have been one of those weird cases where she had gone into her closet and stabbed herself.
Okay, well, just for the sake of argument's sake, let's say there were no knives in the house.
Well, I think, I don't know. Like, the thing is, I think the catalyst for her dying was coming off the Klonopin.
There was something happening there. Now, keep in mind, benzos they do show up in your bloodstream, but let's say you take a 2 milligram Klonopin and...
Well, they testified at the trial that she had it in her bloodstream enough that they could find it.
How much was it? Do you have any idea?
So what it says here is that it was traces that indicated it might have been a day or two since she had taken it, but they didn't know.
Okay, she was prescribed 2 a day. She could take 1 in the morning and 1 at bedtime, and they were 2 milligram Klonopin.
Clonazepam or Klonopin.
So my point is, when you take a Klonopin, we've talked about the benzo withdrawals. I don't know necessarily that it was her coming off of it. She was, there's a lot of ambiguity, or there's a lot of stuff that I feel like is really personal for this case that I didn't break down. For example, people were saying she needed meds, but she wasn't always taking her meds.
Well, even in the screenshot you sent me, there were multiple medications that she had that all of them probably played a little bit of a role in her well-being. Because the screenshot
she was taking Adderall and Seroquel and Klonopin. I can't say that word.
Yeah.
Clonazepam. I can't say that word for some reason. But so she was taking Adderall and Seroquel, which Seroquel is an antidepressant, right? And it's 12:50 when he calls 911, and she had just shot herself. Now, She's supposed to take 20 milligrams of the Adderall twice a day. She's supposed to take the Seroquel before bedtime, which I think Seroquel is a building type drug, so she hadn't had it yet. Okay. I'm just guessing. She hadn't taken her medication that night. All right. So
Right.
she was due a Seroquel and a clonazepam. So if she had taken both of those, we could be looking at a whole different situation here. Like she might have just went to bed.
Hold on a second on Seroquel.
I don't figure out what that is.
Seroquel is an antipsychotic. It's ketamine. So it's a different type of drug.
And it
It's
makes you sleepy. It's used to treat bipolar.
mania, depression. Yeah.
Okay, so I have thoughts on like these different classes of medication, and I don't know anything about Seroquel.
No, yeah. I didn't know it as Seroquel. But here's the thing. What do you think's more likely? That this family is banging a drum and he actually did this and got away with it, or that this woman was off her meds and off the chain?
This woman killed herself.
I know. I'm positive she killed herself.
I am too, and I'm positive that her parents will never believe that. And the reason I was saying like, okay, so let's take the gun out of the equation, and then you said, well, she would have went in her closet and stabbed herself. Well, let's take the knives out of the equation, okay, and let's just say like that narrows down a situation where you've either got somebody who's like committing suicide as a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If you can say no to that, I think that if there was no gun there, she'd be alive today. Okay.
Oh, you think it was that fast that it hit her with the alcohol and the withdrawals and everything?
She didn't have the Seroquel in her system. You know, she didn't stay up till 12:50 normally. She was a respiratory therapist, right? So she's several hours past the time she should have had her Seroquel. She's drank. She hasn't taken her Klonopin, or she's taken extra Klonopin. She had a prescription to take it morning and night. It sounds like her morning dose was what they found in her system. Okay.
Okay.
So it had already broken down. She hadn't taken her nightly dose. Now, people can poo-poo it all they want. Okay. However, when you take medication that is designed to be taken at the same time every day, and you miss it, all right, the effects can be nothing at all, right? They can be no big deal, but they can also be huge, right? And sometimes you're like, well, what was wrong with me? And then you're like, oh, I didn't take my medication at 9 like I normally do, right? Now, we don't have all that information, and it's not brought up in the course of this because it was sort of an all or nothing type thing, right?
Yeah,
And
if we were
typically-
responsible reporters, we would say that we were speculating here.
Typically, well, and some of it is speculation to an extent. We do have that she had bottles filled on or dispensed on December 6th of 11 and November 29th of 11 that were for 2 milligrams of clonazepam twice a day, Seroquel 50 milligrams, one at bedtime, and 20 milligrams of amphetamine, which is Adderall, to be taken twice a day by mouth. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got, that isn't speculation. She's got those bottles filled in her possession. So she had the ability to take the drugs, and somebody had prescribed her the drugs within the month previous. And all of those drugs are a month's supply. So she picked them up on, November and December at the beginning of the month, the end of November and the beginning of December. She's got refills for the Seroquel. Okay. The other two don't have refills, but they're controlled substances. So anyway, my point is somebody told her to take those medicines, right? We've got all that evidence there. It's not speculation. She was drinking. She had possibly had a miscarriage. If she didn't have a miscarriage, she was for some reason pretending she had had a miscarriage. There are all kinds of reasons why women might do that. I'm not going to get into that right now. However, she had previously written her husband a suicide note.
Yeah.
Now, that particular time, she didn't go through with it. I don't even know what the context of that note was, but it existed, and it basically said, "Y'all are better off without me. Goodbye." That kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, it's a rash thought that you write down.
And she didn't kill herself. It was very dramatic, right? Very dramatic. Okay. In this situation, she doesn't have her medicine in her system like it typically is if she takes it like she's supposed to. Okay.
Yeah.
And she's drank alcohol and possibly had some weed. I don't know how that
She definitely wanted some weed.
And so she wasn't thinking rationally. Then her husband had a cow. I mean, just dropped the cow right there on the living room floor over nothing, right? I mean, really, it wasn't anything. Yes, you can get in trouble for having weed in your system. I have a feeling they had of course, him being a corrections officer, he had a very regimented job, right? That if he tested
for his
positive,
safety, yeah, it had to be.
Sure. Okay. But still, it's not the time nor the place to be having that kind of argument, right? I mean, I get where there's a lot at stake, he feels like, because if they lose their job, they've got 3 kids, they can't make their mortgage payment. All this stress is on him. And he's thinking like that. She's thinking, I need to relax. I lost this baby today. Whatever. And then, she's got her husband kind of just bearing down on her. And she was like, oh my God, I can't take it anymore. And then because she had a gun in her nightstand, she shot herself in the head.
Man, I mean, this is an accident. These are so weird to call these accidents, but they're accidents.
Well, and I do think it is an accident. I don't think that, so a suicidal person would be somebody that in my little demonstration would, despite not having a gun, despite not having a knife, they would find a way to kill themselves.
Right.
Okay. And that's kind of a good way to sort of look at it, because truly suicidal people, and I've said this before, I feel like they
don't talk about it.
They never say a word and they just do it one day, right? That's a person who's probably been suicidal most of their life.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you don't have the gun, when you're like, I'm going to shoot myself in the head, and you don't have the gun, well, you can't do that. And then you've got time to think about it, and you're like, well, that was really stupid.
Yeah.
I don't want to shoot myself in the head, right? And, I feel like the more kind of outraged one feels, the quicker and weirder the suicide ends up being, like the knife through the back of the head and all that stuff. That is a person who's in distress.
It absolutely is.
And so, when you have a situation where you can say, okay, if they couldn't get a gun and they couldn't get a knife and they couldn't get pills and they couldn't get up high enough somewhere, would this person have continued their quest to commit suicide? And if the answer is yes, then, they were a suicidal person. But we never know that about people until they actually commit suicide most of the time. Now, it's really scary to look at it that way, because it actually opens up the possibility that any of us could temporarily lose our mind and do that.
But you realize that could happen if we were in this set of circumstances, needing or using these types of medications. That's real.
Yeah, I know it's real. It's very real. Even if you're not using if you're needing these medications and you don't have them, I think you could have the same impulses, because the medications are manipulating the chemicals in your brain. The chemicals in your brain are there even without taking medicine.
Yeah.
So it's all relevant to each other. And it's really about, the availability of the weapon that you're going to use versus it not being available.
Yeah.
It almost seems to me like, I know for a fact that 48-year-old Ashley Fallis would not have done this. Okay. So
Right.
we take that for what it is. I mean, was it a little bit of immaturity? Probably. 3 kids. You think to yourself, well, this was a woman who had a full-time job and 3 kids and a house and a husband. And, well, that's actually all the more reason why you would find this like tiny irrational blip on the radar.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, she died. And so in this case, the noise got heard. He was charged with her murder and he went through a trial. And so in Ellen's case, her death remained a suicide. And at this point right now, like at the end of 2021, there was a suit being allowed to continue forward with a bench trial determining whether or not Ellen's death should be changed to at least undetermined from suicide. Okay. Now, I personally I think that without question, Ellen Greenberg's death was an accident. There are lots of underlying factors and explanations that go along with it, but keeping in mind that there's only those certain selections under manner of death, it was accidental. Okay. She didn't mean to kill herself. And it was a little bit out of her control. Okay. Now, Sam has not been charged. It's very carefully sort of, put together to kind of, I've never seen anybody say like, I want Sam charged.
Right.
Have you?
No, they dance around that. They imply it, but they dance around it.
Right. And so in this similarly to Ashley's case, like if Ellen didn't commit suicide, Sam had to have killed her, right? We talk about it for like 5 episodes, how it has to be him, basically, if there needs to be an alternative. And because there just weren't any other options. And so in this case, obviously, Tom was in the room with her, so it had to be him if she didn't do it. Well, without Ellen's case being switched to a homicide, I don't know that it's going to get to the point. I don't really see what the point is in getting something undone from suicide to homicide unless you're actually because if it's a homicide, the person who committed it should face justice. Okay.
Right.
All right. So in this case, Tom was put on trial and he was found not guilty. Okay. So a jury examined the case. They found him not guilty. You fast forward just a little bit further. I believe, what was the date on the civil suit? Is that recent?
There's several of them. It's an ongoing thing.
Okay, so her parents, in some of the coverage, they have said that if they had done an investigation and found her death to be like without question a suicide, that they would accept it. That's what her mother said. Like I actually heard her mom say it on some interview somewhere. Okay. However, as you start going down the hill, you gain speed and it's harder to stop, right? In any situation. I don't necessarily understand why, having made that statement, she then rejects a jury's verdict. They were absolutely devastated that Tom was found not guilty. They still feel like he was responsible for killing Ashley. And that kind of shows me the tunnel vision that's happening there. And the pain a mom would have in having left a house minutes before her daughter shot herself. And having said that to me, there was no cover up here. Like, he didn't get any special treatment at all. Like, he was treated actually really badly, in my opinion, because him being a corrections officer, having 3 kids and owning a house, there was no reason why he wasn't beside of his wife at the hospital. He should have been allowed to do that. He wasn't going anywhere. They could have investigated him after she died. It was insane that they took him into custody immediately like they did. So every single thing in the civil suits against like the county or the city or the law enforcement, all of that stuff fails to me because of he was not given any special consideration. All the evidence that they say they have that points to him, yes, he felt a tremendous amount of guilt over this situation. If you listen to the 911 call, he says, "No, you're staying here. You're not dying. You're staying here," like telling her, because he knew, right? He knew she had like this irrational thought that if she killed herself, life would be better. And he's saying, no, it's not going to be better, and you've got to stay, right? It's a very genuine outpouring there. He didn't get treated with any special consideration. Everything that was changed or that happened, police can do whatever they want. I don't think anything in this particular situation is going to sway me to think that he killed her because of the way it happened.
Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
What was that made you decide this was a case worth investigating?
Well, as a reporter, you have to fish through stories every day. That's all you do is get news tips, and you have to decide which of these tips is worthy of your time and your resources to really go forward. In this case, the fact that he was a sheriff's corrections officer, the fact that there was a lot of things they pointed to in terms of the evidence that didn't make sense.
You've found that, as we have, that unless the police do a very thorough examination of the death scene or the crime scene on the night it happens, that can really cause a problem later on down the road for finding justice.
Absolutely. And all of the sides agree, these types of cases, you have to look at them as a homicide from the beginning. And if you look at the facts of the case, it does not appear this was treated like a homicide investigation from the beginning. He wasn't separated from his children. He wasn't separated, he wasn't immediately treated as a suspect and is allowed to roam around the property using his phone. That's not how you treat someone who you suspect of a homicide. I think that they were, from the beginning, the Evans Police Department was out of their league. Was it hard knowing when this trial started that it wasn't just Tom Fallis who was really on trial? In some way, you were, and your reporting. Sure. That was difficult. It was difficult to listen to my reporting become part of the defense theory as to why we were all in that courtroom when I knew that wasn't true. I'm curious to see what you would say with this. You're not reporting right now. Did you move into management in part because this case involved more than you ever expected or ever encountered before in a case? It's a question I've asked myself a lot. It was grueling and it was draining. I mean, it's one of the reasons why in the end I decided I needed a break and I want to try my hand at something else. Yeah, it's definitely part of the reason. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know whether Tom Fallis had a role in his wife's death. I can tell you what the facts suggest, but ultimately the jury didn't feel like there was enough investigation, and so that's an indictment on the system more than it's an indictment on Tom Fallis.
So there's something interesting about this guy, Justin Joseph. So there's an old removed internet page from like a while ago that talks about, it's called Black Tie Colorado, and it's an online event planning company that's removed the page. But in a story by Nancy Kuntz, they talk about Justin Joseph, who's this reporter. He's a graduate of the University of Denver Law School, and at the time he was in a relationship with Josh Banker. His mom, dad, brother, their families they have a foundation, and Gary and Cheryl Joseph created the Joseph Family Foundation. Now, while Justin has been nominated for a couple of Emmys and earned a Colorado Broadcasters Association Award for Best Investigative Reporter, his Emmy was for the continuing coverage of the Ashley Falls investigation. His work was featured on multiple outlets for CBS News. However, what they're talking to him about here is his time as a deputy district attorney. And here's like the most interesting thing about Justin Joseph. In spite of like everything that we know about him, he just comes from money. He basically gets a job as a deputy district attorney, and that doesn't go well. He ends up as a reporter, and that doesn't go well, so he ends up in management. Now, I'm not saying that like he's terrible at all of this. What I'm saying is there's a lot of Justin Josephs out there, and the facts in this case suggest that Ashley Falls killed herself. That's all they suggest. They don't suggest anything else. But a reporter was able to get a man indicted on a murder case, and that didn't even stick for the jury. But I think that people need to learn that there's a responsibility beyond the investigators and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys. There's, a lot of responsibility that comes with even starting a true crime podcast and starting to talk about these cases.
I don't know if I can take it. Must be a monster in my head. Lately feels like I've been faking. Think there's a stranger here instead. There you have it. At night I lie awake, wanna escape this. Hold tight, the air is changing. Let's run away, somewhere we can be safe. Somewhere away from all these nightmares, where nobody can find me. Let's run away, far away from all the pain. Run away, no reality to run to, even if we go blindly. Let's go into the wild, wild. Go into the wild. Let's build a rocket ship and fly away. I wonder why I can't remember. Isn't it time I caught my breath? Too many cold nights in December. It's got me guessing all that's left. There you have it. At night I lie awake, wanna escape this. Hold tight, the air is changing. Let's run away, somewhere we can be safe. Somewhere away from all these nightmares, where nobody can find me. Let's run away, far away from all the pain. No reality to run to, even if we go blindly. Let's go into the wild, wild. Go into the wild. Let's build a rocket ship and fly away. Let's go into the wild, wild. Go into the wild. Let's build a rocket ship and fly away. I don't know if I can take it. Must be a monster in my head. Lately feels like I've been faking. Think there's a stranger